Hi there, welcome. This is a short lecture to talk about the Mashauri Solution Alignment Canvas and to help you think about why you put it together and why it will be useful for you to use. So, the overall purpose really was to help founders focus or refocus on their ventures, especially if they're pre-scaling, because very often we start to do things, we start doing more and more and more things, we get different priorities, and we tend to lose focus because it's just easy to do so. I speak from my own personal experience as well as seeing many other founders. So that's the underlying purpose for this new canvas. And what I'm going to take you through is a little bit about why we get it wrong, and then what should product managers think about, especially pre-scaling. We're going to then redefine those elements a little bit, and then digress and look at Peter Thiel and his views on competing versus monopolies. Then moving back to the overall theme and think about how you experiment, and then to introduce to you the Mashauri Solution Canvas and how you might use it for your venture. So let's start off with why we do get it wrong. How do you start a venture? There's many different ways, and there's lots of advice. There's the Lean Startup by Eric Ries. There's the Four Steps to Epiphany by Steve Blank, and various versions of that. And you can read about these things, and you can read about the MIT version of starting a business with Bill Owlett through his book Disciplined Entrepreneurship. And then there's Ash Maurya running Lean. And then there's Biz Model Generation. And there's more and more and more of these books and more of this information, some of which is consistent and some of which is actually, frankly, inconsistent. And here's more, and here's yet more. And the list goes on and on and on. And you can really, if you're not careful, just absorb yourself in all this material until you get to the point where you just can't take it anymore. So first of all, let's take a step back and just say, what are the key things coming out of this literature? And from a Mashauri point of view, the sort of key lessons really are down to this. You need to think about experimenting your way to success through building prototypes, through learning from them, through measuring, and then going back to rebuild again. And that experimentation approach is absolutely critical. Secondly, is being really clear that a startup is all about trying to discover a new business model that works. It's not starting with one and just running with it. It's looking for a good business model. Thirdly, Paul Graham from Y Combinator's famous quote: "Don't build something that no one wants," and so don't build something that you can't sell. Think big, act small. So be aware of where you're going, have that big vision, but actually work in small areas on small segments, and you can't act big from the very beginning. And critically, you need to get out of the building and be speaking to people, especially customers and potential customers, but others like investors and industry experts and other founders. And finally, trying to keep it simple. Don't overcomplicate things. And if we move from there to what goes wrong, well, the first thing is we overcomplicate things. We start off simply, but more and more things get added on. We have more things to do. We dive into the web, we dive into social media, we dive into all sorts of areas, and we end up with this long list of priorities, and we sort of lose focus on what's really important. You know, we get into sort of building and doing and building our product before we really understand what we should be building. We chase finance, this siren call of massive millions coming from venture capitalists, and so we think about what they're looking for. We think about massive markets, and sometimes this isn't the time to be thinking. In fact, frequently, it's not the time to be thinking about chasing finance from VCs when you're just getting going. And frankly, we start to believe our own bullshit, to use a crude expression. We sort of, what we have in our head we think is right. So we believe that's what people want. That's what their problems are. That's how the market's looking. That's what the competition is like. Without actually going out there and really testing it, we believe our own dreams. And those are the sort of frequent things that we see working with hundreds or thousands of founders all around the world. So if that's where we are and how things go wrong, what is it we should be thinking about as product managers or the person inside the organization that's responsible for product? Obviously, at a very early stage, you don't have product managers. You've got either one founder or a few founders who do everything, but one of you has to think about the product. And we had a lecture in India recently. We asked our students, our MBA students, what do they think product managers have to think about? And these were the sort of things they came up with: price, why should people shift from what they're doing, who the buyers are, channels, value added, all valid things. And obviously, a product manager doesn't just think about product. And in fact, that's often the wrong thing for them to think about. It's more about the markets they're addressing, the future customers, and the dynamics of the market. So if we take those elements and let's just redefine them more simply, and this really boils down to 5 areas you need to think about: price, niche, go to market, transformation, and solution. Let's just take one of those in turn and define them. So from a niche point of view, we're talking about a group of people, as a group of customers, in a very specific set of circumstances with a desired state different from their current state. That is, they've got a problem that needs solving. Secondly is the transformation. What is the movement from the current state to the desired state that they want? So take a boat in the ocean that goes down and a family swims for safety, and the father goes one way and the rest of the family go to the other, and the family ends up on a desert island all by himself without food, without water, and he knows his family have got to another desert island, not a desert island, an island where there's plenty of food and water and company, and they're happy and comfortable. So his current state is this isolated desert island, and his desired state is this other island where his family is. And the transformation this person requires is how to go from his desert island to the new island. So that's a transformation that we need to think about. Thirdly, price. So how important is this to that niche, and how much would they be prepared to make that transformation happen? And notice at this stage we haven't spoken about the solution or product. Now we get to that. So how do you make that transformation happen for the customer? And then finally, how are you going to reach and sell to that niche? And that's generally a combination of what channels are you going to use and what is the conversion process, so how to get them from being a non-buyer to a buyer. And we can take the elements that the MBAs came up with, and we can put them into these categories. So users, buyers, the segment, the persona, their current problem, that all falls under the niche. The transformation is, so what is the problem being solved? What is a good outcome? How important is it to them? Why is it a problem? That's transformation. The price is all about the revenue model, about who pays, how do they buy, what do they pay. Probably what's important there is, what is it worth to them? That's the critical thing. Then solution. So why should they change what they're doing? How will you deliver? What is value? What does your solution look like? How is it far better than what's being offered at the moment? And then lastly, access is things like, how do you reach them? What is your story? What is your message? How do you get their attention? So if you take all those things, you can start putting them into those 5 categories. So now it's time to take a little bit of a digression, and you'll see why eventually. But there's a famous founder, I'm sure you've all heard of, called Peter Thiel, who was one of the founders of PayPal. He was actually the chief exec. He is a famous investor. He is invested in some of the top companies like Facebook and Twitter. He has this obviously has this eye for investment and this deep understanding. Fairly controversial figure. And what he says is, monopoly is the condition of every successful business. So he believes that what we should be all aiming for is to get monopolies. I'm going to give you a little bit of a flavor of what he's talking about. You might want to view the video yourself to get the full story. In fact, here is the video. It's in this presentation pack. And it's provocative. and it's going to make you think, and it's going to make you go, But when you actually see what he's trying to say, what he's trying to put forward, and sort of get behind some of the emotion or negative emotion that can be associated with monopolies, you can see that he's talking a lot of sense, and there's some real strong rationale behind it. And he used he twisted quite a famous expression, but said, all happy companies are different. Each one earns a monopoly by solving a unique problem. All failed companies are the same. They fail to escape competition. And he basically says competition is for losers and monopoly is for the winners. Once again, provocative, clearly. So the question, how does a venture build value, and how do we measure that? So there's a classical definition that the value of an organization is based on risk-adjusted future cash flows. But let's boil that down to a little more simply. And what Thiel says is you need to capture the maximum value created in your market segment. And I'll show you a formula for that right now in a moment. But the key elements are clearly the market size of your market segment, what share you have, and how efficiently you capture that share. So how profitably do you capture that share? Is your net profit 5% and you make $5 from every $100 you sell, or is it 90% where you make $90 from every $100 you sell? So the formula to think about is valuation is really a function of profitability, which in itself is XA times E to the 1 minus C. And the definition of those elements are XA is the size of your market sector A, measured in dollars. So how much revenue is generated in your sector by people buying products. The C represents the proportion your competitors own of the current market. And this will be a number between 0 and 1. If they own 90% of the market, that'll be 0.9. If they own 100%, it'll be 1. If they own 0%, if you're the only player, that becomes a C. And finally, E is how efficiently you capture your share of the market. So if the market was $100,000, you had 10%, $10,000. That's the sort of revenue line. But how efficiently you capture that is how much money you have left over after you've paid for all the costs and the fixed expenses combined. So how efficiently do you do that? And one can think about optimization of that formula. So how do you optimize profitability? Well, the one thing is to think about the size of your market sector XA, because as that moves to infinity, your value will move towards infinity by definition. But there's a bit of a problem with that. What is a high XA, a high value of the market sector means a number of things. Normally, in almost every case, it means there's very high competition. And where there's high competition, there's low efficiency of capturing market share, because high competition generally means fierce competition and pushing prices down to the minimum. So it's really hard to compete in those very big growing segments. So how else can you optimize? Well, you start looking at the other side of the equation and think about, can you reduce C to 0? So if you can get work in an area where there's no competitors, then 1 minus C equals 1 by definition. And you increase your efficiency to 1. So efficiency could be any number from 1 down to minus whatever. So if it was a negative number, it means you're actually losing money, like Twitter does. Their cost of doing business are less than their revenue. But obviously, if you move towards 1, where your efficiency is of capturing the market is great, then that's better. If you think in terms of manufacturing organizations where their gross profit is normally in the maybe 30% or 40% and net profit in 5 or 10%, when you start looking more at digital products where the gross profit is often 90% or even higher potentially, and you can really do things on scale, then E can become quite a big number and work towards 1. And the idea is usually you work to finding those niches you can monopolize, and then you move out of those to adjacent markets, and that's sort of Geoffrey Moore's thinking. So what Peter's saying really is you need to find a niche and you need to dominate it and convert it into a monopoly. And that really is all about building a solution that really delivers on the required transformation. So helping that niche transform from the current state to the desired state in the time they want it to happen in the most perfect way they can do that. And if you can start building in real benefits for that niche that is hard to copy, and you need to find areas where others cannot compete, such as highly customized service. And you can, if you really understand that niche and you really understand the transformation they want, and you're not looking at a massive market of heterogeneous customers, you're looking at a group of homogeneous people who face the same problem, and you can really deliver a solution around that problem, then you can start to make that more of a monopoly. Once you've done that, you then start building it to other niches with that same mindset as you work out how you're going to scale. So that was Peter Thiel on monopoly. Let's get back to our 5 elements again: price, niche, access, transformation, solution. And a few more maths. If you think of those 5 areas, well, niche is independent of all the rest. The niche you're going to approach with their specific problem, their current state, is independent of the other 4 elements. The transformation required is obviously dependent on the niche, the transformation that particular niche requires. The price is dependent on the transformation and the niche. The value of the transformation to that particular group is what they're prepared to pay for it. In terms of solution, well, that's dependent on the price, the transformation, and the niche. So what you develop to do to solve the problem depends on P, T, and N. And finally, access, how you get them, how you reach them and sell to those customers that go to market, that's dependent on the other 4. So solution, the price, the transformation, and the niche. And if you sort of get that, you can start thinking about the order in which you need to develop your value proposition, and then how to experiment and to test it. So you start off by solving for N, T, and P: niche, transformation, and price. And by doing that, you start to validate the market by finding out that someone is going to pay they'll pay a certain amount for a specific transformation. Once you've done that, you then solve for N, T, P, and S. So your solution that can deliver the desired transformation at a cost below the price being paid. And that's what's called product market fit. I know you'll hear people like Anderson saying product market fit is a vague concept and you'll know when you get there. It's not vague. It's exactly that you can find a market segment with a transformation you can deliver at a price that is more than your cost. Once you've done that, you've got product market fit. Then finally, you need to solve for all of them, including the access, and you need to there validate your access channel by showing for every $1 you spend on marketing and sales, you get more than $1 back. And then that gets into sort of validation of your overall business model. And to do this is so much easier in a small, well-defined niche. Why? Well, because you can understand the customer and their precise context much better than if you're trying to look at a number of different customers who don't quite look the same, don't have the same problem, and you start getting vague and generic. Understanding the customer means you can really clearly define their problem. You can understand how serious it is to them and what is their current solution. And then you can actually begin to specify their required transformation. What is it they have? What do they want to move from current state to desired state? Then you can start thinking, well, what minimum viable product can I build that really tests whether I can make that transformation happen? So the smaller and the more well-defined the niche, all these steps are far, far easier if you have a focused mindset, a sort of working in a monopoly, as Peter Thiel would say. And obviously doing that, you then have a much better understanding of access channels. Where do these people hang out? What social media? Do they go to conferences? Do they what do they read to get information about how they solve their problem? Where do they Google? Once again, if you know the niche, you can start understanding that much better, and you can start interacting with them. And leading from there is experimentation results are easier to understand because you have a very narrow focus, and you can see if X happens, you can work out why that is, rather than trying to work out 15 or 16 different reasons why X might have happened. So from an experimentation point of view, you start with your base model, your N1, T1, P1, S1, A1, your hypothesis about the niche, the transformation, the price, the solution, and the access. Then you start testing it. So for example, if you find that your cost of acquisition is too high, maybe you're selling B2B and you're using conferences plus a sales force, you could test a paid advertising plus an internal sales model. So you're testing the model N1, T1, P1, S1, A2. So you're keeping everything constant, but testing whether you can find a better access element. A second example, which was actually happened in Mashauri, where you might find maybe your niche can't afford your solution. So in our case, we moved from a B2C to a B2B model. So we stopped selling to students who remained our users, but our buyers became the universities. So our model was testing an N2, a new niche, but keeping the other elements the same. And a third example is an example if you're a management consultant and you're helping organizations improve operations, and it's really based on your time and your input and your knowledge, that solution may be just too expensive or not scalable. So maybe you can find a different way of delivering that solution, maybe some sort of technology-based solution. So in that case, what you're doing is keeping N1, T1, P1, and A1 constant and changing your solution. So that's how you think about experimentation using these 5 elements. And some guidelines around that is you need to be scientific about it. So work out what your experiment is, have some real hypotheses which are falsifiable, understand what your metrics are, your targets, and your timing. And there's plenty of material around it that can help you do this. As mentioned, you need to have hypotheses that you can prove to be true or prove to be false. Otherwise, you're killing yourself. Be clear about the baseline. So where are you starting? What is your N1, T1, S1, and so forth? What are those metrics? So you can see what the change is and whether that meets what you wanted, what you expected, or what you hoped for or not. And if 2 or more changes are required, say you need to change your solution and the access channel, what you need to do is do it one by one. Don't do 2 changes at the same time, because it's really, really hard to work out what the impact has been. And start off with a higher order. So start off with a niche before the solution, or start off with the solution before the access channel. It just makes it more sense, and it's easier to work out what's right and what's wrong. So finally, we've developed a sort of canvas to help you think about this. We've called it the Mashauri Solution Alignment Canvas, where you have your niche and you need to think about who is the segment, who is the real specific persona, archetype person, what is the problem there being solved for that very narrow niche. And you need to be able to answer all those 3 questions. Then what is the transformation they're looking for? What is their current state? What is their desired state? And how soon or quick would they like this to happen? And from a pricing point of view, what is the value of that transformation to them? I mean, how much would that guy pay to go from his isolated desert island to the one where his family are having the time of their lives? Probably is a very high price. How much have they got? What can they afford? And who pays? Also very critical when you're thinking about especially B2B markets. And you need to be able to answer all those questions very specifically so they tie in with the niche and the transformation element. Then your solution. How does your solution create that desired transformation? And how is it 10 times, 100 times better than the current solution? And how defendable is it? How can you do it such that no one can copy you, so that you you can build your own monopoly. Finally, once you've got that, is how do you go to market? What channels are you going to use? What's the story you're going to say that's going to really attract attention and resonate with the market? And how do you actually convert them? How do you move them to becoming a buyer? And it sounds simple, and it is simple when you boil it down to these 5 elements. So what we've done from a Canvas point of view, we've actually put a Google Sheet together, which you can literally complete. There's a link to the template here, and here's the bit.ly link, and you literally fill in your details here. And when you've done that, you ask yourself a question. First of all, are all these 5 elements really consistent and self-reinforcing? Does your solution really deliver on the transformation? And is that transformation really what the niche is looking for? And is the price you want to offer really something that they feel is right given the need for that transformation? And then think about what assumptions are you making in putting that together? What are your top 3 key assumptions, your unproven hypotheses? And from there you move on to think about how you actually test them. So in a nutshell, that's the process I've taken you through to think about why we get things wrong, and then how should product managers think about developing a value proposition and testing. We took those elements and put them into a category of 5, digressed a bit with Peter Thiel and his monopoly, but understood that a monopoly is really key to, or is a very, very beneficial if you work in a monopoly rather than a hyper-competitive environment. Moving back to the elements and thinking about, so how do you use those 5 elements to experiment, and then how do you use the Mashauri Solution Canvas to think about that. And hopefully that's been enough to really maybe make you take a step back and think about where you're focusing now and how you might refocus. And the question to ask yourself, what have you learned? What do you disagree with? Maybe me or Peter Thiel, that's easy. But what will you explore further? That's important. What do you think you're going to change or do differently after having had this? And how has your thinking changed? So I hope this has been a useful lecture, and I hope it's going to be something that allows you to use our new Canvas in a way that helps you. And we'd be delighted to get any feedback from you.